Well, thank you, Julie, and also welcome to all the guests that are joining us tonight. Just a very brief introduction because some may have already attended a couple of previous webinars and some may be new. My background is really in equine nutrition, and in 2009 I founded MB Equine Services. And so I'm a registered equine nutritionist with the Nutritional Society here in Australia. And within the consultancy, I really offer nutritional advice for private horse owners and the industry. And besides the nutrition, I have also a keen interest in property designing and pasture management. And I'm a registered or certified permaculture designer. So that's why a couple of these webinars are really integrating into this regenerative property design and pasture management. And today we're going to continue on the composting. And besides the consultancy, I'm also involved as a lecturer at the University of New England, where I'm lecturing in equine nutrition and behavior, and also doing a PhD study in foraging behavior and particular diet selection in horses. So a lot on my plate and a lot of different topics. So I am not an expert in any of these per se. So I'm in most of these webinars, I'm trying to kind of bring all these topics together and kind of connect the dots and kind of bring a bigger picture. So I hope that that you don't have too specialized questions about composting, because I'm not a full-on specialist, but I'm going to do my best. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the business, or particular a new section of the business about the equine permaculture movement that we're launching next month. So very exciting. So I want to tell a little bit more about it at the end of the workshop, about a webinar. Sorry. So what we're going to talk about today is, well, we're actually continuing on the regenerative solutions for improving pastures and soil health, and with a focus on composting. So we're going to first talk going a little bit a step back, looking at pasture problems. Then we're going to talk about the benefits of composting, a bit about soil biology. Then we go into the techniques where we're going to mainly focus on passive composting, or the difference between passive composting and hot and turning composting. And then I want to finish up a little bit of a couple of notes or comments on the compost tea. I'm not going to go in too much detail into it, and how we can apply that in key lining. So it kind of integrates quite well with the previous webinar. Throughout this session, you can ask questions. So we'll try to answer them within the subject. So there are three main areas. So we'll try and answer some throughout this presentation. And then at the end, we have hopefully a little bit time left to have some more questions, or you can email some questions as well. So in one of the previous webinars, we already highlighted some of the common problems that we can encounter on horse properties. And here is a list, and I think that most of you will be familiar with these or are experiencing some of these. And we've been already discussing, well, how can we improve this? So how can we avoid it? How can we improve our soils? And one of the first things that comes to mind is generally a quite aggressive approach, particularly when we look at modern agriculture, by tiling the soil and then resowing it and put fertilizer on. That is generally the way that we've gone about tackling some of these problems. Of course, we already been into a couple of alternative and more sustainable strategies. And what I want to highlight here is that with this process of tiling, we do get some soil fertility initially, because what is actually happening is we're damaging the soil, and then the soil life is dying, and that is actually the fertilizer for the plants initially. We enhancing that by putting a little bit of for the plants fertilizer on. So there's so-called salt-based fertilizer that you may be familiar with, the NPKs. but they really are designed more for the plant, not for soil life, and actually they can cause, well, they can really decrease the quality and initially also the quantity of our soil. And so it's not really a sustainable way of farming. We really need to look at soil health, and I think that I've highlighted that already previously in my presentations. But I really would like to highlight these two quotes. So it's not the soil itself, it's the soil life that is the most important element. And you need to create more soil than you are using, and that's the path to sustainability. And both of these quotes come from Jeff Lawton from the Permaculture Research Institute in the Shannon in New South Wales. And I just really want to highlight these quotes because really that's the way to go. If we really want to improve some of the problems, we already highlighted that we need to build soil, so we can either, for instance, patch up certain areas by mulching it, and so bringing on our property organic matter. So, for instance, we can use old hay or old straw and mulch it, and try to, in that way, create more soil, so and trapping moisture. And that's a slow process. It will happen, but you have to take your horses out of that area, or you have to fence it off. The other way that we already highlighted, and that's the main focus of this presentation, is to look into more organic, more building solutions. And that's where we come to making compost. So fertilizing either with direct compost or with an extract, so tea or biofertilizer. So in this presentation I'm not going to go into much on the biofertilizer, but there are a couple of ways how we can build soil and put fertility back into the soils using compost tea and biofertilizer. Because I think that we've highlighted many times, once we create healthy soil, then we create healthy plants, and that can sustain our horses. Very brief overview, and I didn't want to go too much detail into it, because I think by now we have quite a picture that we really need to work with nature rather against nature if we really want to create more resource, have more resource availability, and to have that over longer terms. So really look at the immediate terms and the long terms for sustaining the needs of our horses and also for our own needs. It's not only for our horses. You may have a property where you're even trying to grow foods. So are there any questions so far on this part about soil health or the importance of looking into sustainable and organic ways to build soils?
There's no questions so far, Mariette, but so if we continue at the moment, but we encourage people to just type in on whatever device you have, maybe questions, maybe a chat box, depending how you're logged in as to what is available. And that way we can get some conversation going between the class. Thank you.
Well, it's a very short introduction, as said, and probably very straightforward. And so if we look at now at what do you do with your property waste, because composting is really about, well, waste management. What we mostly see on horse properties is either two things. It's we like to harrow it, so we like to harrow all the manure on the pastures and spread it out. It's a very easy way to do, but it can create some problems. It depends also on the amount of pasture you have, how many horses you have on it. Do you have paddocks available where you can do cell grazing in a rotational system, where you can move horses off the paddock, or are you spreading it out in a paddock where horses need to continue graze as well, which can cause various problems. We've been discussing this as the horse sick pasture, so the pastures that may be reinfected with parasites and worms. Also, what we also see is that horses become then very selective in grazing because they don't really like to graze where they have defecated. So they will only move in certain areas, which can cause overgrazing and growth of the so-called weeds in areas. So we really need to manage that. So it's not necessarily bad, but depending on your property size, also on the climate. So in some climates, harrowing may not really be beneficial because the feces just stays on top of the ground and is not really taken up by the soil, by the microbes and by soil workers, because there is no moisture. So we see this generally in arid systems. So there needs to be some disturbance and water before we can really clean up the manure, if manure is spread that way. However, if you're in a kind of in a more humid environment with more water distribution, you will see that it really is quickly cleaned up by it soaks back into the soil and it's cleaned up by broken down by your soil microbes. The other way that they go about their property waste is to make a little bit of money by selling their manure. And I would be very interested to hear now how many people are actually doing this with their waste. So is there anybody that is selling their poo or is using the harrowing?
We've had some replies come in, Mariette. We've got one participant that makes biofertilizer in compost tea and compost. Another person does hot composting. Another participant puts lots of rest in the paddocks between grazing. We've got harrowing, and then we've got some people that not doing anything at the moment, and they've come along to learn.
Okay, very good. Well, it's very good to hear that we already have some people that are either already compost or even go a step further, making their own compost tea or fertilizer. So when we get to that part, I'd love to hear a little bit more about their application and their observations of and their benefits on their property. So getting back to using waste, well, instead of selling it or instead of harrowing it, we can actually collect it and turn it actually into a resource by adding a couple of other ingredients. And that is really what composting is about. It's not only about manure, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But what is composting? It's using the natural process of decay to change organic waste into a valuable humus-like material called compost. So really nature is doing its work, and we really just recycle the nutrients. And just to put it in a nice picture, so what is it actually when we look at the components? So as I said, it's not only manure, which is the green, so which is the nitrogen of the ingredient of compost, but we also need a part of carbon, which is the brown. So we have browns plus greens will make our compost, but we need a little bit of magic to make that happen. And we need water, we need air, and that will bring life. So we have microorganisms, different microorganisms, including fungi and bacteria that will help all to break those that organic matter down, and the end result is this kind of humus-like structure. So it's kind of dark brown, almost black. And there are many benefits to composting, and I've listed here a couple. And you can do a Google search about organic versus artificial fertilizer, and you will find a lot of discussion. So, but what it's most important and what the benefits are, it really removes waste, and you use by recycling. You can then use that for soil bathing. It actually has the ability to destroy pathogens. So by composting, because we'll get to that when we get into the mechanisms when we're talking about heating the pile up. But you can destroy pathogens. You can destroy weed seeds. Microorganisms in the compost can actually even degrade toxic chemicals. They can actually bind them. It's also not only the microorganisms, but also just by the structure, by the carbon structure, we can actually absorb a lot of toxins. So it can be a filter, and it recycles the dead, which can be very handy. And it really, in the end, can actually make you more money. Instead of selling your manure, think about selling your compost just one step further. It's definitely something that you can can sell to your local, for instance, gardens or neighbors. There's always some, particularly if you're in a semi-urban area, that's a very good way to make a little bit more money out of your waste. But if you have a horse property, you probably will reuse it onto your pastures. The other thing why we should compost, not only for our own interest, if we look at the bigger picture, it's also about earth care, and within permaculture that's actually number one: earth care, people care, and fair share. And why composting? Because if you look at this map, it's not very clear. I'm sorry about that. I could not find a better one in that resolution. But the red really hides the most vulnerable parts, and it kind of goes back into the green parts, or in the yellow parts. And we can see that in Australia we have some areas that are at danger of more desertification. As you can see, it is getting closer to the areas that we live, so on the east coast, and other parts of the world are struggling with the same thing, and it's mostly caused by by the way that we've been farming. So we've lost a lot of soil, which we already highlighted in the beginning, by using tiling and resowing of crops, and also tackling pasture problems, or creating more pastures for our livestock. We've been really depleting our soils, and on top of that, not only are we using salt-based fertilizers, but think about all the other chemicals that we've been using, so fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, and that is causing significant loss or quality and quantity of our soil. So we really need to work with soil if we want to create healthier pastures, more biomass. And so a little bit about soil. We need to know a little bit more about soil biology. Again, I just want to kind of go back to these quotes, because they are just a reminder of how important it is to think about soil first before you think about that top part. And just have a look at some, and I think I've highlighted this before in one of the webinars, but this is generally what we see on the left side. We generally see this is the kind of typical soil that you will find on many properties. It's kind of really stripped off it's really stripped. There's no real topsoil. What we are really seeing is the subsoil. On this side, on the other side, we really see a soil that has a better structure. It needs to be good soil, or good topsoil needs to be full of life, and it needs to be easily easily dig into or kind of break apart. It needs to hold a little bit, so it should not crumble, but it should really hold a little bit, and that's the moisture. See those molecules, humus, one part of humus can hold 4 parts of water, and that's really the power of this humus, this kind of decay of organic matter. And this is one of the things people then ask about soil type. They are really worried about, well, I don't have the right soil type. Well, we know that for instance, certain soil will dictate, for instance, an acid environment, others an alkaline environment. So when you have a waterlogged soil, it will be more acid, anaerobic. When we're in the desert, we find a more alkaline. We would like to have the soil somewhere between 6.5 and 6 for a pH, because that allows the best uptake for plants of minerals. So we generally say that don't worry too much about the type. You can create topsoil on any type. Okay, some soils it will be a bit harder and in some climates it will be a little bit harder than in others. But it's really about thinking about topsoil, building topsoil on any subsoil you can build. But there is a lot out there about which soil types and what kind of strategies can you apply, adding lime and that kind of thing. But it's really about that top layer, and I cannot highlight that enough, because it's not the plants that we feed. We feed it through a process of breakdown via microorganisms. So we have to think about our microorganisms. And here again, a schematic picture of some relations within the soil, and that symbiotic relationships with plants. Because in the soil, the animals don't have direct ability to capture sunlight, so the photosynthesis process cannot happen, and so they rely on actually this exchange with plants. So by the root tips, they have an exchange of carbohydrates so that they have their energy, and in return some of these organisms, in particular fungi and some of these bacteria, will exchange minerals and even water. And that's a very important process. So even if you want to do a soil test and you find, oh yeah, my soil is very, very well, it's, you know, it has all the minerals, it is really about the life. And generally what you see is depleted soils, but also depleted biology. It does go hand in hand. And just here a nice picture to highlight the fungi. So just to go back, which we call the mycorrhizal fungi here, that has here a clear arrow both ways. That's where I want to highlight this symbiotic relationship. But because these networks are very important, particularly when we look at trees, because these networks can stretch for miles, and they can be a network for this exchange. So this is just a very nice picture to just highlight this connection. So they are just the threads of a fungal spore, and as I said, it can cover like 1,000 acres. There is actually a book from Paul Stammet, and it's called "How Fungi Can Save," or like "How Fungi Can Save the World." And I will be able to give the actual reference later on in this webinar. I don't have a reference list, but I will definitely put that in the email after the webinar. Fungi is the largest and the oldest organism in the world, so it has been co-involved for many thousands of years, and it really is an important part in our soil. So we really need to think about fungi, because it can also absorb toxins. It has been used even to clean up oil spills. That's actually some of the work that Paul Stammet has been involved with. So very fascinating, although when you look at it you kind of go, well, it's a boring organism, but it's very important in our soil structures, and particularly when we're when we're dealing with trees. Because when we are looking actually at soil, so more our pastures that we are dealing with for horses, there is more a relationship with bacteria. And here we have, for instance, those that you may be familiar with, the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So they are actually already attached, and they are able to exchange nitrogen, because plants cannot use the atmospheric nitrogen. That can only be used, only bacteria can transform this into a form that can be taken up. So there's all these kind of molecular kind of changes that need to happen before it can be, the nitrogen can actually be used by the plant. And so nitrogen fixing bacteria play an important role by making this available. So it's kind of a shortcut within this in this process. So fungi and bacteria play a role. So in fungi we see more relationship with trees, and also with grasses, but more dominated in forest areas. And when we're looking at pasture plants or herbaceous plants, we see more an importance of bacterial activity. Besides fungi and bacteria, weeds can also be very important, because when we talked about it in a previous workshop, weeds can be an indicator of what is happening or not happening with your soil, and generally they can accumulate that is lacking. So for instance, if the soil is lacking nitrogen, what we see is we have these nitrogen fixing plants dominating. Or if the soil is very compacted, we can get, for instance, thistles. For instance, when it's low in calcium, we see these plants having their own niches, and we can actually use that by actually, instead of spraying our weeds, we can actually take those weeds and either mulch it back, so that it actually becomes organic matter that is broken down at the soil level, or we can use these actually in our compost. Are there any questions so far on the soil biology? Again, just very brief
Okay, we've got a couple of questions, but they actually relate to slides that you have coming up. One is brown to green ratio. Another one relates to how often should we use compost tea or biofertilizer. So I think some of those are coming up in your slides. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so if there are no questions about soil biology, again, it's not my specialty, so I may be missing some very important points here. But again, I'm just painting the bigger picture of why we should take care of our soil and which relationships are very important. And that is something that we will get back into our nitrogen to carbon ratio, because we can play with that to make either a more fungal dominated or a more bacterial dominated compost.
Okay.
So I wanted to highlight that.
Yes. Sorry, Mariette. We've just had two questions come in. I'll read them both out. One is, do you need to plough in the weeds? And then the second question from another participant is, so slashing will be good for returning weed biomass? ?
Yes, so on the last one, so by slashing, what you're trying to do is actually just want to slash it before the plant seeds. It's sometimes difficult, particularly with some of these very low to the ground weeds. But what we're trying to do is chop the biomass on top so that the root system is also chopped, because it's a direct response. Anything that happens above ground happens below ground. So anything that is cut back will also be cut back on the root level. And so all that organic matter is broken down and becomes food for our soil microorganisms, as well as that it can be a pocket for water again and for air. And that is particularly of interest when we're dealing with these deep taproot weeds, such as thistles. So instead of pulling them fully out, I mean, you can slash them first to kind of let those roots break down, and then pull them out if you really wanted to use it in your compost, or to really kind of get rid of if you have really very harsh patches. But also with other weeds, it's really about trying to cut it before it sets seeds and to really kind of return it to the soil organisms as an organic matter. And it's one of the techniques. It's together with adding compost to really kind of outcompete the weeds and create a healthier or more nutrient-rich soil, so that those pioneer species cannot grow there because it's too toxic. There's too many nutrients that they cannot grow in. And that's what you're trying to do with this succession part. With the second or the first question about the plowing through the weeds, am I right? I would suggest that with the previous webinar, we highlighted using key lining to kind of just use it as a decompaction, like a tool to decompact, and then to actually you can put other seeds in there, like particularly the seeds that you would like pasture species, if you want to kind of create and build soil and then outcompete some of the weeds. But yeah, one of the main techniques people have been using is just cultivating it, but then you open the topsoil and you damage the soil life, and then generally you get more weeds back. So I would do non-tiling if that is what was meant with that first question. So I'm not really sure if I answered that correctly, or if the person meant that in that way. So let's go to actually talk about the composting techniques, because all the other questions are really relating to this carbon to nitrogen ratios. So let's go into that. So first of all, we need to consider storage, because there are some legislations, and it really depends on the council. And I think I've spoken with Julie about this, that in each council, like in South Australia, it can be different from Queensland. But there are some general things and common things, because we really need to avoid, the main thing that we need to do is we need to avoid runoff of leakage to our catchments, so rivers and creeks, but also the leakage into your soil. So you need to consider the location of either your straight manure or your bedding, and also your compost storage. You want to have certain sections of your property designated for that. Ideally, of course, you want to have them closer to the stables or the paddock so that it's manageable. This is very typical in Europe. We have horses indoors, so it's more of a mix between already straw and manure rather than straight manure. But when we're here in Australia, you see more that horses are kept outdoors and we collect straight manure. So it really is about collecting all of this and then kind of look at how you want to kind of compost your manure pile. Also, rain. You need to be careful that even if you have it on a concrete slab, you need to make sure that it's either covered or the structure needs to have some either drainage or some roof structure. I have here a couple of examples. These are from a colleague in the US, some of the properties that she's been involved with. And this is one of the suggestions that they come up with, like have a full-on different segments, concreted in. They even have small doors so you can access it, but you can just dump it in from the top, so from the paddock or from, well, in this case this is North America, so I assume close to the stables, and just dump it in from the top. And here another one is a little bit more open, and that just keeps it also clean, and it allows you to have different areas for your wastage so that you can collect your browns and you can collect your greens. And there are different flooring. Again, it depends a little bit on the council. For instance, in Europe, there is a system that if you have X amount of horses on a property, then you need a concrete slab. And if you have less, then you can get away with that's not close to channels or rivers. But you can use flooring like gravel, clay, rubber. There are a lot of solutions, but check with your council just to make sure that you not get in trouble if your neighbor is really having problems with your operation or your horses. Okay, so one of the first things I want to talk about is just piling up horse manure and just letting it sit like we see in this picture, which is what we see typically in Australia and also in Europe, is not composting. It's just a pile of waste. Composting is about managing the decomposition. So a lot of people stock up, but not truly compost. So let's really get into the details. So to get correct composting, it really will eliminate odors, flies, weed seeds, even internal parasites. And you can use that as either directly on your own property, so it is clean. You can use it directly and spread it on your property. Your horses can go back on the grazing, or you can even resell it. But the most important factor to create that, we need to consider the carbon to nitrogen ratio, oxygen, moisture, and temperature. Those are very important to consider. And that needs to be managed, and that's really when you start composting. Okay, so the first option of composting is the most, probably the easiest one, which is less labor intensive, which is the passive composting. So that involves stacking up materials in a pile for a longer term, and often it's often mainly based on feces, so just piling up your horse poop. But the moisture content can be very high, so you can have a lot of leakage, and it can get into an anaerobic situation. And what we also see is that it actually loses its volume. I have another picture of this. We'll highlight this later. But what we generally see with passive composting is that people do add a little bit other materials, so a little bit of browns and a little bit of the stable waste or old hay. And then what we see is that people use a little bit of aeration. So they don't want to turn it. They don't want to do too much labor-intensive They don't want to do a lot of work, and then they use PVC tubes with little holes to aerate it. So here you see a picture of it, which means that you can sit it for longer term. You don't turn it, and you just let it sit, but you have a little bit of aeration happening. But what happens is that you actually you can still create. I mean, as you can see, the PVC tubes only go to the middle, and it may still be causing an anaerobic situation, which can be very dangerous. These are the bacteria that can be very harmful, particularly for the respiratory system of the horse. Also, by just passive composting, what we see is that we lose volume. Nitrogen is really the fuel. If we talk about the components, nitrogen is really the fuel of the organic matter and it really kind of it really loses volume, so it really kind of collapses. When if we really want to do good composting, it really needs to be almost similar. It decreases a little bit in size, but it still needs to have almost a similar volume that when you started with it. And that's what you can accomplish by using hot or turning composting. So my question is now, how many people are composting on the passive and with the passive system? Or is actually now realizing, oh, I'm doing passive composting?
We might ask people just to put up their electronic hand. So you've got a little hand button there. How many people are doing passive composting? Oh, we've got most people. About 13.
Yeah, so the passive system is generally the one that is adopted. If not harrowing, we just generally let the manure pile just sit there. But let's just talk about another solution. And when you get the hang of this, it's not difficult. It's not it's not rocket science. It is a great way to return it to your pastures and build soil in that way. Because good compost is free of pathogens, that's first, and it's a result of hot and turning composting where you have an aerobic system. That's the most important, oxygen. And it really helps with fast-tracking the breakdown. As with the passive composting system, you really just let it sit, and it takes a long time to break that down. Particular on the outside part, so the inside part may almost get into this anaerobic situation, but the outside parts are not, really disturbed. It really brings also finer particles by using hot and turning composting, so you get a more even mix. And we need, and this is kind of the answer on that question, we need between 25 and 30 to 1 part, so carbon to nitrogen. So nitrogen is really our fuel, and carbon is really the kind of substance that really kind of adds the organic part to it. And depending, and we'll get into this, depending if you want to have a more fungi-dominated compost or a bacterial dominated compost, you change it. So more wood, so more woody material, so more carbon, is more fungi dominated, because as we know, fungi likes forest, really kind of make fungal spawns on and really decompose the woody material, so cellulose. Whether bacteria need a little bit more in the nitrogen part, so less wood, so they need less woody materials because they cannot break that down as well as what fungi can. So here are a couple of browns and greens with their carbon to nitrogen. So that's just when you have wood chips or sawdust, you will have a 400:1 ratio. And when we go to so that's like your highest. So if you go to straight wood, it's the highest carbon. And then when you get to straw or leaves or fruit waste, you get lower to the carbon and carbon to nitrogen. And of course, with the greens, it gets even less. So chicken manure, so here we have horse manure is 18:1. And so as you can see, it's not really ideal because we really want to have that 25 to 30. So it needs some browns to kind of balance it. And then you have chicken manure, and any of these can be used. So here, kind of the steps. So with hot composting, there's been quite a lot of work done by the University of Berkeley in California. So they've done a lot of research on this. So this is the science. So there is science behind it, and they've done a lot of measuring, and they've tested it. And many people in permaculture have kind of followed the concept and have made adaptations to it. So even if you Google hot composting or Berkeley method, you will find a couple of different ways to do it. But it all stems from the Berkeley method. The most important is temperature. So we really need to monitor and manage the temperature, and the ideal range is between 55 and 65 because it is the ideal temperature for bacteria to multiply, because that's what we're really doing. Is the bacteria are eating all this organic matter, and they breed, and they just multiply and multiply and multiply, and that energy is actually what really really makes that heat. But when it gets too hot, they will die, and when it's too cold, they don't want to they won't multiply as quickly. So you have this fine range, and so by trial and error, this is the one that is suggested. Then already highlighted the carbon to nitrogen balance is somewhere around here, depending on what kind of type compost you want to make. Then ideally, of course, it needs to be manageable because we need to turn it. That's the labor path. So around 1.5 meters, so 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter in the diameter, and then as a base, and then we want to have it max, say 1.5 meter high, and ideally not closed in because it's an aerated process. We want to have oxygen going and air going around the pile. And if you're having like tree branches, you need to chop that down. You need to break that down because organisms don't do really well with large chunks. It will take a lot of time, and it will be very hard to turn the pile. So it makes your life easier if you just chop that down. And we need to use a technique where we don't ad hoc start turning it. No, we need to take, after a couple of days, the inside to the outside so that we get an even mix and that the temperature goes through the whole pile rather than only the center like what we have in passive composting.
Mariette, I've just got some questions coming up, which you may be answering shortly, but I'll just let you know what they are. Do your greens need to be fresh? That's one question. And another is, if you mulch dry manure with sawdust through a mulching machine simultaneously, will that affect the C to N ratio to any effect?
Well, yes. So on the first question on greens, yes. The fresher it is, the better, because it really helps with the nitrogens. When it's fresh, it's high in nitrogen, and it will really help with the activation of getting this multiplication of bacteria. And we'll get to that when we talk about compost activators. I have a couple of suggestions on that. But yeah, there are green clippings. It can be like a day old or anything like that. I mean, you can, like leaves, of course, your carbons you can easily store. But when it comes to the greens, you have your manure that can already been collected over a week or even longer. But yeah, if you can get some of your fresh clippings, for instance, from your grass, that will be the ideal situation, and that can be from the day before. But the fresher it is, the more nitrogen, and the better the fuel is for the breaking down of the organics or the carbon path. And then the second question was mixing sawdust with manure. Well, it really is already creating, you're already creating a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So going back to this, if you then look at sawdust, which is around 3 to 25, and you would have that 1-to-1, you will be, kind of in the middle, but probably you will have more sawdust than manure, and then it really depends on what part will be the highest, and you will probably sit somewhere in between that carbon to nitrogen ratio, because you're kind of already mixing it like we would want to do in the actual compost pie or the cake. So yes, you can already use that. That's no problem. And particularly when you're using stable waste, it is generally already mixed with a carbon part. You just have to make sure that you're not overdoing on the nitrogen, because then you will have too much fuel, and it will then decrease too much in size. So you need to really keep that 25 to 30 to 1 kind of ratio so that you keep that volume. Okay, so here I had a picture. I don't know why that is not, I had some technical problems. I apologize. But here I had a schematic picture of building a cake. So luckily I still have the picture. So as I said, it pretty much gives the dimensions, and I already highlighted. It's around 1 meter by 1 meter. Here they put actually some chicken wire around it, which really kind of closes everything in, and particularly in the beginning that really helps with building the layers. So you build always first your carbon layer, and then you add your greens, and then carbon layer and greens, carbon layer and greens. So you build really that kind of cake. And you spread the nitrogen part is much thinner than your carbon, because we have that 25 to 1. And you just build that, you stack that up, and it's also by trial and error. You just have to really start composting, and then you will know if you're doing the right thing or not, because if it decreases in size, too much nitrogen. If it doesn't mix really well, then you have too much carbon, and you may need to add more nitrogen. So it will tell you if you're doing a good job, and it will probably take a couple of practices. Again, my artwork is failing on me. We had here a picture of layered compost and activators. So as I said, like fresh clipping would probably be ideal because it really is high in nitrogen and can really activate, really kickstart your composting process. There are actually some particular ingredients that is used by composters. So comfrey, nettles, or yarrow is used. So that are just greens that has shown to really activate, just kickstart the process. And you just put them in the middle. So you have these layers, and you just put them in the middle of your pile. So you just start stacking up, and when you get halfway, so around 75 centimeter, you start adding, when you add your nitrogen layer, you add some of this to it. You can also use fish or a dead animal, because that really is also high in nitrogen and really will make that party happening of bacteria starting to break it down and multiply. I probably won't have any. Oh, I will have, my artwork is back. So getting then to the start, so we can create compost. I forgot to add that by using the Berkeley method or the hot composting technique, turning compost technique, you can make compost within 18 days. And you do need to follow a schedule, though. You need to start it, so you build your pie, and then you don't do anything with it till day 4. It's also important to add water, and I think in my next slide I will get into the actual process. But the turning is very important. So the first 2 days you just leave it, and then on the 3rd day you start the first turning, and you continue that on a 1 day, skipping 1 day rotation. And I hope my artwork is back. Yes. Okay. When you get to the first, so it's first 4 days, 3 days. Again, some people may divert a little bit from the original method, but 3-4 days, you then start to turn, and as I said, you don't just ad hoc turn, you'd actually take the inside, and that needs to be placed on the outside, so you kind of build around it. And that will help with managing the temperature, so that's not getting too hot and then the outside is getting too cold and nothing is happening on that and nothing is breaking down. That is really the reason why we are turning. And then we need to measure that. So there are some thermometers that we can use, that we can put in these piles. So we really need these very long ones. They need to be around 1 meter, so that we can dig that in and get this reading, so that we can really manage the temperature. As already highlighted, between 55 and 65 degrees. That's the optimum temperature for these bacteria to have their party. Then again, we are, after that, every second day, we are turning it in a similar technique. So we're doing the similar way. We're trying to get the outside to the inside and the inside to the outside. And we do that, we continue doing that till we get to day 18. And in practice, there are people that have done it in less. It really depends on the particles. So if you have very fine particles, like like sawdust, and it will be much easier to also turn, and then when we have more chunks. As already highlighted, not all ingredients have that ideal ratio of 25 to 30. Like that's an example, a very well example, where we have manure and straw dust all mixed together. You may still need to add a little bit more carbon or add a little bit more manure to get to this right ratio. And it really is about, there is no exact, it's not exact, it's really about if the carbon is too high, then you add a little bit more nitrogen. If the nitrogen is too high, you add a little bit more carbon. So by manure or grass clippings, or by cardboard, dry leaves. So it's really about trial and error. And then I already highlighted this. It's really about observing how much that pile is coming down in size. And this is the passive composting, so it really reduces in that in volume over 6 months. So they give around 6 months. And if we use composting on an 18-day system with oxygen, we have a little bit of a decrease, but it stays quite similar to our starting. We do need to protect it from direct sunlight and heavy rain, because we want to have moisture in there, because we do need to water it down. That's what I'm highlighting here. I was already wondering where this water part comes in. It is very important while you layer it. Here is one of the pictures of the course that I did at the Permaculture Research Institute, where we were making this. This pie is really that you add water with layers. And how much water? Well, it should not leach out, so it should not drain out. You really want to kind of get a little bit of material, you want to kind of squeeze it, and it needs to have a little bit of dripping happening, but definitely should not soak off. Because too much water will be too hard for the bacteria to get that right temperature. So you really want to kind of control the moisture and the temperature. Again, a bit by trial and error. So sometimes, it's better to add a little bit of water with the days than to already flood it pretty much in the beginning. And turning, aeration, very important. That is actually the success, the secret to the success of composting. So any questions about that part? Sorry about the.
Hi, Mariette. We'll just take one more question, but we're running out of time to get to the end of the presentation. So one question here is: do you add water when you turn?
Well, if it's very dry, yes. So you do add a little bit of water. You do want to kind of keep moisture in, and because as soon as it's drying up, then the bacteria, then you won't get the temperature as well. So too much water or not enough water will not allow the bacteria to get to the right temperature for multiplying, because they need that moisture for also the decay, also for the decay process. So yes, so you do add water to the pile according to when you turn it to the dryness, because that is also dictated by the outdoor temperature. So if you're in a humid system or in an arid system, your compost pile will react differently. So as long as you don't overdo it, generally when you start turning it, you add a little bit of, you kind of sprinkle it in layers, and in that way, pretty much like what we've done in the beginning, kind of just adding to it.
We might go right through to the end, Mariette, and then ask any questions at the end, just so we can keep on time.
Yeah, so compost tea. So it's not a subject that is discussed a lot actually at workshops, because depending on your region, they are a little bit careful with this, because compost tea, if you don't do it in the right way, so if we don't aerate it, we get anaerobic conditions, and when we spread that extract onto our soils, that can be harmful. So we need to make sure that if we want to go into this next step, we need first of all aerobic compost, so we need to have done composting by using the Berg method, and then that we can use to actually make into a liquid by extracting bacteria. So we actually use a little bit of the compost that we made, and we put that kind of like I'm highlighting here in a bag, in a tea bag, and then we kind of let water and air pass that to kind of extract all these bacteria, all these organisms, so fungi, protozoa, and nematodes from the compost, and to dilute it into the water. So you actually just extend their life. You're not creating more. Just that to make really clear that the process of multiplication happens during the composting process. And when we are taking that part and putting it in water with air, we just only extract it and extend their life. So it's really the foundation of compost for compost tea is already creating a good compost. So you can either have a fungi-dominated or a bacterial-dominated compost, and that will also dictate your tea and application. So yeah, it's a brewing process, and you can then use it as a soil tonic or directly onto the leaf, so foliar. Here are some systems. Here is a really nice example of that tea bag. This is a 1,000-liter setup, and it has already an automatic aerator system pump on it. This is a similar system, but on the side. So there are a variation of structures out there. There are commercial ones. People have made their own. You can have them even in smaller buckets. So people that are gardening, they use generally these systems, so because they're only having small areas. But for large applications, we really kind of look into these 1,000-liter systems, and definitely on a commercial level, when you're buying any of compost teas, they are made more in these kind of, or even bigger barrels than these. So there was a question about, well, how much compost should you use to make tea, and how much should you use for the application? So I knew that question would come, and I've highlighted them here in the just with the figures. So there is a group called Soil Food Web there's a researcher. Her name is Elaine Ingham, and she is really she's made this book about compost tea. So you can find some information about that online. But from that book or from her recommendations. It's between 2 and 3 kilos of compost put on 7.5 liters, or on larger systems 9 to 10 on 2 to 400. And then it really, I've seen many different dilutions. I've seen 6 to 7 kilos on 1,000 liters, and then different dilutions. So everybody has been trialing with that. But these are kind of from the literature that I found, and then there is a application of 50 liters per hectare for when you are spraying it on the leaf directly, and you're using a little bit more per hectare when you're going to use it on soil. But then there are also people that have a dilution range within another dilution step. So if you're interested in this process, I definitely suggest that you look up some of the literature. There are also some workshops actually on compost tea, and I definitely recommend to do those if you're interested in this, because you really need to know what you're doing, because as I said, without oxygen you can create a very dangerous situation if you then apply onto the soil. Also, it's important that one part of water to 1 part of oxygen. So here we have a 1,000-liter system. It means that we need 1,000 cubic meters of air flowing through that per minute. So it's quite a bit of a setup, and it may not be feasible. But you can do also smaller setups for like 25 liters and do smaller areas of that, because you can use quite a lot. Based on the dilution, you don't really need a lot. So you can have a look into that. There's quite a lot of information on that also on the permaculture on the permaculture forums and websites. In the first 3 hours, so it's a process where we aerate it for 24 hours. In the first 3 hours, you can use the extract and apply it directly onto your soil. If you sit it for 24 hours, to extend that life, you have to kind of feed the soil microbes, and then you can put sugar in there, seaweed, fish, oatmeal. There's a variety of different recipes, and again, you can find a lot on these on some of the permaculture forums and biodynamic. It's not only permaculture; it's also biodynamic farming and different organic farming sites. But definitely suggest that you look into the actual literature, the book or the suggestions written by Elaine, because that's kind of her research, and she's trialed a couple of things. Here I want to highlight. This is a picture of the applying compost tea. This is a commercial. It had a horse in it. It's actually just a winery, but they make compost tea. And they actually spray it directly onto the leaves of the winery. So this is in Canada, and it's really to boost the health of the leaf, to make it stronger and to resist pesticides. So it's, instead of tackling it when it's at its worst by using pesticides pesticides, this is kind of the preventative method, and it's organic and nobody is harmed. They even use a horse to apply it. So I thought it was a great picture actually. And then the last one is that we could even use compost tea in the keyline plowing. We've discussed the keyline system as a decompact pastures, a fast tracking of decompacting pastures and soil. And here we see an application of a super plow where you actually can put seeds, and you can also have a system on here where you can actually feed directly compost tea into your rip lines, which they call super plow. There's quite a lot of information and also some videos on it, which is quite nice to research. But not something that may be directly in hand, but it's just to highlight that there are a lot of applications for compost tea. I don't have the biofertilizer isn't something that I have not put in this presentation, but I do talk about it a little bit in my book, and it's also just it's actually more a ferment that you make with different ingredients, and then you kind of ferment that for a while, and that's kind of the basis of the biofertilizer. But also for time reasons, I'm not going to go too much detail into that. So if you're a bit interested in that, there is a bit more information on the website or in the book. And then finally, just a note on that, it's all great that we are thinking about soil building and that we are using different strategies like mulching or composting to create soils. But then we still need to make sure that we are not destroying the soils with our animals by overgrazing it, over-trampling it. So my last note is that you still, while you're thinking about all these strategies, direct application on the soil, we really need to also think about kind of zooming out again and see what our animals are doing, and we need to manage that. So even though you can put horses back onto a paddock if you spread compost, you may still need to move your animals to keep your paddocks rest. So don't forget that. So think about your grazing planning as well, which is actually a webinar on its own. So that brings me really to the end of this webinar. I hope I managed it well with the time, and more than happy to take any questions or any comments, of course.
Perhaps we'll just take one question, and then you can let us know about your new website.
Yeah.
Somebody would like to know, how often do you spread the compost tea or biofertilizer onto your pasture?
Yes, so it is really, compost tea is a kind of a Yakult for the soil, or for when you use it on the leaves. I'm not really up to date, for instance, with the foliar, but for instance for the soil, you only need to use it a couple of times, and then the times between when you apply it for the first time and then the second time will increase. So then the third time can take longer, so you don't have to do it with every season, or for instance, every sowing season or improvement season. So for instance, autumn and spring. You may then skip a whole season and apply it the next year when the rain sets in, for instance. So once you apply it, you're already boosting that health, and you don't, unless the soil is very depleted, you may have to give it another boost on a shorter term, and then you can kind of stretch it to the next season. So you skip kind of the season, and then you can do it on a 2-year rotation. So you don't necessarily have to apply it on a regular basis if you manage the soil well with your grazing, because as soon as problems occur or the soil is degrading in quality, then you may have to feed it a bit more. But the idea behind it is that you kind of give it a boost and then kind of let it function, and then give it a boost when it's with a kind of a delayed, because if everything goes well, you don't really need that because you're already creating good soil life. So it is really to kickstart soils, and then just to kind of maintain it over a longer term. So that's generally how it's been advised. But when it's on the foliar, I'm not so sure how often you could apply that. So when you spray it directly onto the leaves, for instance, in that winery, it would be interesting to know a little bit more about that. But that's what I know from the literature and from talking with people, is that you can you really kind of spread it out. It's not every 6 months. It could be 6 months, and then a year, and then 2 years if you manage it well. Are there any more questions, or we kind of get to the end of it? So
I think what we'll do, Mariette, is just wrap up, and then any unanswered questions, they'll be emailed to Mariette, and then you'll be able to answer them personally, and there will be a follow-up email with different links and a link to this webinar, which has been recorded and put online.
Yep. And that is also kind of bringing me to actually inviting you as a horse owner and attending this webinar. It's actually, as I said, I'm not a specialist per se in any of these areas. I've been bringing it all together for the bigger picture of managing horses in pasture system. I'm really focused on, well, how do horses make diet choices, and how do they select their nutrients, and how do they move through a landscape. And all of these things all play part in creating a right environment for horses and ourselves. And so what my new kind of movement is actually to invite people to kind of join the equine permaculture movement and actually come to the website where we're running a blog for horse owners and land owners to share their experience. So I'm inviting you to actually write blog posts about your experiences on your property. For instance, I already am very happy to hear that people are already experiencing with compost or even compost tea, and I would like to hear from you how that works on your property, and so that people can get an example, and that we can get some before and after pictures, and that will be a great way to kind of start a bigger discussion, and hopefully also more people joining in the action of actually starting composting or even going to compost teas. So the website is just equinepermaculture.com. If you go to that website at the moment, we are working on it, and the official launch is not till the end of or mid February. And we will have educators like myself, and I'm inviting different educators to also write blog posts. So it will be an educational website with informational articles by, well, if you call it experts or people that are in this field, and also having these stories from the horse owners themselves, so that we can kind of get this kind of mix of information. Because a lot of this, when we're working with nature, it's not exact science. It's actually, there's a large part, there's an art to it. And that art, trial and error, that's great. That's great value for everybody. And so if you have a nice story, if you would like to contribute to this new website and movement, there will be little additional things to it. So hopefully in the next webinar, I may be able to give some more information. Then definitely contact me, and love to hear your story. So send an email back to Julie, and I will get in touch with you.
Well, thank you very much, Mariette. That was excellent. And as mentioned, this webinar has been recorded, so we will put that online and send everybody the link. And just take a note of Mariette's next one there on the Thursday, the 12th of February.
So that will be on how we can balance the nutritional requirements or the nutrition of horses that are pastured, and what do we have to do with the supplementary feeding. So how much do we feed? And it's actually a very tricky one.